Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Finding the Unicorn, the podcast by Montash, all about trying to find those hard to reach candidates from across the European tech industry. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Usha Tyagi. Usha is the head of people here at Montash, and she's been working here for an awful, well, seems like decades, finding some of the best talent across Europe to fill, well, internally, but also many of our roles. So, Usha, do you want to introduce yourself? Let everyone know who you are, what you do.
Hi, I'm Usha Tyagi, and I'm head of people here at Montash, and very enthusiastic about bringing in new talent to the business at all levels, from graduate all the way through to director level. Been with the business now for 8.5 years. It's been a really incredible journey. The business has gone from strength to strength, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to the future.
And is it right that Usha, you've been in recruitment for before you joined Montash? So you've
Yes,
been
that's right.
working kind of client side as well as internal.
That's right, indeed. Yes, I worked on the agency side as well as internal. Yes.
Cool. So today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which is emotional intelligence.
hmm
And in a nutshell, it is a bit of psychology. How do you interpret signs? How do you read people? How do you use certain skills to understand their real intent? Because I guess a lot of candidates who are interviewed across Europe right now, they may not always be telling the truth when they have their interviews. It's probably about right, isn't it, Ush?
Sometimes.
So I guess we'll start with when you're interviewing people, and you probably interviewed hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of people over the years for all sorts of different roles. And I guess the sort of emotional intelligence questions, they're all probably quite universal, right? It doesn't matter if you're interviewing for a DevOps engineer or a cloud engineer or a marketing student or a CEO, they're all probably the same sort of things. So, what sort of physical signs are you looking for when you're assessing a candidate's interest?
So we're looking for positive body language. So sort of sitting up, good eye contact, welcoming gestures, lots of smiles. Someone that seems like they're engaged in the conversation.
And how has that changed since COVID? Since this is a lot of this has been now done virtually. So I guess in the past, you doing this face to face, and I would assume that it might be a lot easier for you to pick up subliminal body language when you can see them in person. Is their hand clicking on the table? Are they fidgeting,
Yeah.
which you might not be able to see virtually. How have you kind of coped with that?
So we do several video calls across the team just so we get a better understanding of who we're hiring and um, you get to understand a little bit more about them as a person, opposed to just having sort of a one-stage interview. And again, it's picking up on, have they put a background behind them? How are they emotionally aware of their surroundings? And competency-based questions are really key. So really homing in on the key core qualities or values that you want to bring into the business, and then having set competency questions around those values and those behaviors to really identify whether it is a core value of theirs, or it's just something they're telling you in an interview because it's what they think you want to hear.
And you mentioned their background. What does that mean to you? What do you take from someone who's displaying or not displaying their background, or if it's messy, unmessy? What are you reading into that?
Preparation, I think, someone that has not prepared for the interview, perhaps, or may not be aware of perception, because that's also very, very important, especially when you're in a client facing role, like a lot of the roles that we hire for. Um, it just understanding that professional world as such, really, and what would be deemed as professional and unprofessional. I know that's a key topic, that a lot of people are talking about at the moment. Working from home, not a problem. You could be sitting in the kitchen. It's just understanding what that surrounding looks like. Is it tidy in the background? Do you need a background up or not? Have you got laundry in the background? I've interviewed plenty of people where they're in the bedroom, or they're in their conservatory, etc. It's just being a little bit aware of what potentially is appropriate and not appropriate, essentially.
In your view, is it appropriate to have a virtual background?
It doesn't. It's not a necessity. I think it's personal choice, of course.
Mhm.
Um, Again, it depends on what you're interviewing for, what level you're at, who you're interviewing with. Are you is it with a hiring manager that you'll be working with? Is it going to be with a group of people? Because it's a panel interview. It just depends. But I think having that self awareness of making sure that you're in a nice quiet space that's that's also not diverting the attention of the interviewer to be, if you've got things going on in the background, perhaps attention can be diverted. So it's also just making sure that you're aware of having all the attention on what you're saying and what you're presenting, opposed to things that are going on in the background. Hence why a lot of businesses do their interviews, either in boardrooms or spaces which are neutral, just to create a nice calm environment.
Fair enough. How would you rate your background today, Ish?
Calm.
Calm, good. Because I know we had a mild panic before when we realised that the virtual background didn't work on this platform.
Yeah,
Um, but luckily, the background is neutral.
just a neutral
My
background.
attention's on you. You're looking professional. It's looking
Thank
great.
you.
That's good. um, what kind of red flags are you looking for when you're interviewing someone? What are there any kind of physical? Let's start with physical signs. Are there any physical signs which you think that might be hiding something else, or there might be a kind of subliminal display of something?
I think lack of eye contact is always a key indicator, potentially of confidence, potentially of uh, whether they are telling you the absolute truth or whether they're having some time to think. I think body language is really key. Someone sitting there with their arms crossed or slouching in their seat doesn't always give the best impression. But again, we're not basing it all just on the EI. You'd look at competency based answers to make a final decision, but I think it does make a big impact on first impressions, when someone is perhaps their body language isn't positive.
And is that changed virtually to in person?
It
How
has
have you had
done. I
to?
have I
Yeah,
have found that, yes.
because I guess eye contact's quite difficult virtually because the actual camera and the screen can be different places,
Yeah,
and there's probably a more an easier way to sit behind a screen and feel a bit more confident than it is to be in person.
absolutely.
Is that something a mistake you might have made in the past, where someone has come across very, very well in the virtual world, sitting in their comfortable chair at home in a setting they enjoy, and then coming to meet you in person? Is that something you've experienced before?
Yes, there has been a difference. So when we've hired people throughout the COVID period, where it was 100% virtual interviews in the hiring period, we had some instances where people came on board and they were quite different to how we had anticipated them or read their body language through virtual interviewing. But based on competencies, they were able to do the job, luckily, which is good. But yes, there can be a difference from virtual interviews to in-person interviews for sure.
And what are the kind of two or three ways you've had to adapt your interviewing methods from in person to virtual? From learning about things like that, where you might have picked up on that earlier, or you might have made a mistake here, from learning.
Yeah, I think a lot more time in just getting to know them instead of just diving straight into the competency side of things, like really understanding who they are as a person, and just building up that sort of interpersonal relationship with them, which is something that we do, but we've emphasized it more throughout the COVID period, and just really understanding how they've adapted to this new world of working. To try and get them to open up and feel a bit more relaxed, so that you get the true of them, and that's really helped. And actually, it's something that we're going to do even in our in person, our face to face interviews, because it gives you a better understanding of who you're hiring, opposed to just looking at the skill sets.
Is it important to know the why, the deep reason behind people taking a role? Now, I appreciate that some of our roles, some of the people listening today, the roles they're advertising for are contracts, freelance work, where the personal isn't as important. But there'll be lots of people who are hiring for perm roles across the kind of tech world. So, is understanding the deep rooted reason why someone's taking a role, is that important?
Absolutely. I think whether you're in a perm role or a contract role, understanding the why is imperative. I think for the success of completing whatever it is that you've signed up to do, and also enjoying it, and from a business perspective, to really make sure that you're placing the right people in the right roles to get the best outputs. I think it's essential. Why is absolutely core to hiring.
How do you find the why behind people? Because people don't want to open up about that sort of stuff, right? What sort of question would you ask, or how would you approach tackling someone who didn't want to speak to you about that sort of thing? What sort of questions would you ask? How would you phrase things? When do you know when to push, when to pull back?
I think the key thing here is just making the environment as comfortable as possible, and working with the interviewee. to make sure that it's a comfortable conversation. I think whenever you're putting people into a situation where they're uncomfortable, you're never going to get the true why. I think definitely making people feel at ease, understanding them a little bit more, having that kind of human conversation with them, and then asking key questions around their intentions of why they've left their previous role, really understanding what their situation was previously to perhaps understand what the journey ahead may look like. And then really trying to um, using key again, it depends on the value set that you're looking for, the key competence you're looking for, but really trying to understand previous behaviors, and then looking at their future needs and desires for potentially it could be a bigger team or it could be a more interesting project. It could be they want to, they felt that there's a ceiling perhaps. If they're in a permanent role, they might want a bigger team, a bigger challenge. But by understanding that and explaining the why for the reason that you're asking the questions usually helps to open up candidates. So the reason I'm asking this question is because of why, and then going into the questions usually helps give context to why you're asking, which then helps people feel a bit more at ease for them to be able to open up to you.
What are those key questions you ask?
To understand the why, it's really understanding what they've been doing, why they enjoy what they've been doing, and what they don't enjoy doing, and why they don't enjoy doing those things, and then trying to work from there and picture together what that perfect role would look like moving forward. And then looking at the motivations, what are their personal circumstances? Do they have children? Are they relocating? Are they working internationally at the moment, but they want to be based in a different place? So really understanding that what their current situation is and why they're in that current situation, and then the kind of the reasoning behind the changes that they're wanting to make is absolutely key.
Sure. How do you balance skill versus will? Something that lots of people ask all the time. Where do you balance if someone is great technically at the role, but you question their motives? How long are they going to be around for? Are they going to get on with everyone? Are they lacking confidence? Are they overconfident? How do you balance those two?
I think a lot of the will side of things comes through just basic behaviours in the interview stages, where how quickly is a candidate responding to emails, or how quickly are they getting back to you with information that you've requested, how prompt are they to turn up to an interview, are they giving you feedback, how open are the conversations. So those are the key things that you would typically look for in terms of will at an interview stage, and skill would be all based around the competency question that you're asking and previous technical endorsements or potentially references that you would ask for during the interview process. But essentially, will's got to come from the individual, and the balance has got to be that we focus on: can they do the job? Have they got the technical skill to do the job? Have we got a platform to support the kind of learning element of perhaps any gaps? And then the will's got to come from having really open conversations about their behavior or their kind of attitude towards whatever it is that they're doing, and just having that open dialogue and that space for open communication, I think, is key to manage that will and keep the balance.
And you mentioned before, if I can just go back to it, the question was around making the candidate feel comfortable, so they can open up, they can, maybe talk a bit more openly than they would previously.
Hmm.
Now, an interview is not a very natural circumstance.
Hmm.
Obviously, people could be doing it because they need to put food on their table or they want to get their big promotion. They might have built up that pressure in their mind. What are the practical things you might do to make a candidate feel more relaxed? And do you really want to make that candidate feel relaxed if them being nervous is showing they maybe can't handle stress very well?
I
Two questions
think,
there.
yeah. So to answer your first question, how do we make candidates feel comfortable? So a nice warm welcome is absolutely key. I think making sure that they, feel as though that you are approachable, I think, is absolutely key. And then really getting to know them at the beginning of the interview. So there is a big emphasis in the interviewing that we do on understanding who they are, why they're here, a little bit about their journey, and really focusing on them initially, and then opening up to the skill set and the competency based questions. Um, and I think in terms of your second question, um, nerves, I think, are everybody feels them, however confident you may be. And I think, sometimes it can hinder your interview because you could be really good at the role, but it's just that sort of interview jitters, as I call it. And it might be that you don't normally get nervous in the role that you're doing because you're really confident about that, because you're in a
Yep.
completely new setting, the nerves set in. So I think it would depend on what role you're interviewing for, what type of activities you'll be carrying out in the role that you're doing, and whether the nerves are just based on because you're in a really synthetic situation in an interview, or whether it's nerves around when you're asking a competency based question. I think I keep going back to competency because that really will define whether they are able to do the job or not, whether they have the basic skills to do the role where you can then build on those skills. But I think nerves are good. I think it shows passion. I think it
Hmm.
shows that people care. And yeah, again, it depends on the role. Obviously, there are some roles which potentially, if you're more client facing, or if you're in a project management role where you're having to deal with external stakeholders as well as internal stakeholders, um, confidence is key. So there might be some, there might be some questions that will be asked around that in terms of confidence in particular roles. But I think overall, if you can see it's just from the interview perspective, but the persona changes when they start talking about their previous history and their competencies, you can then try and work out, is this just a nervous person, or are they just nervous in the interview setting?
Sure. So it sounds like it's looking for whether their mood changes
Correct.
when they talk about something they're more comfortable talking about, which might be their role, but maybe not the interview process itself.
Exactly.
You also mentioned there about kind of stress, and lots of the people listening are going to be hiring for high stress roles where there are tight deadlines,
Hmm.
projects to be delivered, pressure from investors, boards, all that sort of stuff.
Hmm.
How do you stress test someone in an interview? How do you understand how they're going to deal with stress?
We would root back to stressful situations that they've been in previously, try and understand what that situation was, what led to that situation arising, and then how they've managed it. And then really looking at how they feel. I think understanding how somebody has reacted and felt about a situation helps you understand how well they deal with stress, and what their coping mechanisms are, which is it's very, very imperative if you're in a highly stressful role that someone has those coping mechanisms to be able to deal with a role that's stressful. I think being thrust into something stressful and then not being able to cope with it effectively would probably mean that they're not right for the role. But if their coping mechanisms are, whether that's going to the gym, whether that's they just have a process in which that they are able to manage it, being highly organized obviously helps in this highly stressful role. And then again, looking at those key competencies and the key skills that surround a stressful role, and the coping mechanisms to help manage that, I think are imperative for sure.
Do you ever purposely put someone under a more stressful situation in the interview to try and test their response, which might be a particularly tough line of questions, or it might be springing something on them that they weren't expecting, or it might be turning up late to see their reaction, or I don't know
We do.
what sort of dark magic do you employ?
So in order to create a slightly stressful or more intense situation, we might give them a task to do which they weren't prepared to do. Obviously, give them a full briefing, give them full understanding of what needs to be done, but no prior knowledge that it was going to be part of the interview process. That creates a scenario where they're going to be put under a bit of stress. There'll be a time frame around that, and then we see how they manage the scenario that we've presented, and also then see how they're feeling, understand how they feel that's understand the emotion around that and how well they've managed it. I think the key takeaways really is how they've managed the stress, opposed to whether they've done the activity correctly or not. Um, and those coping mechanisms then are usually the natural way of them dealing with a stressful situation, opposed to them just giving you an interview answer.
And what are you looking for in that? So you're giving someone a task to do.
Mhm.
They may not be doing it well. They may not be stressed. What are you looking to signify that they are stressed or they are dealing with it well or not well?
Asking good questions at the beginning of that task, so someone that's prepared to understand the why and what they're doing, so they've got a full understanding of what they need to go in and do, because in any stressful situation, you need to know what you need to go and achieve. Then looking at how organized they are, do they have good time management? Have they been able to complete the task as best they can in that time? And then looking at the delivery after the kind of the debriefing afterwards, how they felt, what their processes were to achieve the task, um, how they now feel after having achieved it, and what their takeaways were from the experience, because I think all of those things are looking at that coping piece of how do they manage the stress in the moment when something is dropped on them, even though they've been given full briefing, they know exactly what they need to do, but it's just, it's obviously something that they haven't been prepared for.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of stops the prepared cookie cutter
Yeah,
boilerplate answers, because you're seeing them in real life in a real life setting.
yeah.
Um, People who are prepared for interviews can have prepared answers. They can assume you're going to ask, here are the top 20 questions that I'm going to get asked. How do you cut through that? How do you understand when someone is giving a prepared answer, which might not be what their real thoughts are?
To show, so we will always ask them to demonstrate where they've implemented that answer elsewhere. So, somebody might say to me, "Oh, I'm really, really, really self-driven." And we will then look at, okay, well, where have you shown that drive? Where have you implemented it? What did you achieve by implementing that drive? What you set out, what were you setting out to achieve, and what did you actually achieve? And actually, when you start to really knuckle down in terms of the competency you're looking for examples and the competency based examples that you where they've demonstrated the skill set, that tends to um, set aside those that actually have the competency as a key skill, and those that have just said it in an interview because they've read the job spec and realised that that's what we're looking for as such. So key
Okay.
examples of their experience where they've demonstrated that skill over a time period. So we would look at something that was more recent, that perhaps in maybe not the last job but the job before, to create a bit of a time span to see how have they one developed that skill, but where have they used it on sort of more than one occasion.
Yeah, makes sense. Um, so, how many stages of interview do you usually have? Is there a perfect amount? And also, bundling into those questions is, what are those interview stages for? What's their purpose?
I don't think there's a perfect amount. I think it depends on the role. I think it depends on what your business processes are. But I think in terms of the stages, I think having a face to face in a virtual setting is definitely one a time saver, but also a good indicator of who you're potentially going to invest some time in that interview process. We have sort of an 8 hour pre assessment um, process for people at Montage. So this initial kind of interaction over video is really, really insightful. I think then maybe having sort of a practical stage where they are either completing a task on site or they're shadowing in some sort of capacity is really useful, because it gives you an idea of where those potential challenges are, or the skill gaps are, but also what the key skill set is in a live setting. Um, and then just really understanding why those processes are in place and what you're looking to achieve from each stage in the interview process. But the market is fierce out there. Competitors are, you're up against competition. People are being taken off the market very quickly. So making sure that it's really a streamlined process, even if there are several steps in that process, perhaps over 2 to 3 stages, but maybe having longer stages at each phase to complete everything that you'd like to understand about your candidates, but essentially a streamlined, fast process which allows you to test skill set, and also for the candidate to experience, your environment, your culture, the team that they perhaps may be going into, and the work that they'll be doing, so they have a really clear understanding of the job that they're going to be undertaking and whether it's the right thing for them.
How important is selling the business to the candidate? Because the markets which our listeners will be working in now, they're very, very candidate driven, very, very candidate short. And the candidates now have a lot more choice than they did a year ago, or especially a year ago, but even 2 years ago, 3 years ago. There's lots of roles and a very small number of candidates. How do you sell the business, the company, the dream, the vision to the candidate in the interview process?
I think you're absolutely right. It's a candidate short market out there, and the competition is fierce. Really understanding the motivations and the why of the candidate is key then, in terms of looking at what it is that you want to display that the business offers. So if a candidate is looking to make a move because of the team size, then really focusing on what that growth element may be for that business or that particular team. If it's a case of remuneration, looking at what the benefit packages are and really focusing on the overall offering that business can offer. I think it really depends on what the motivators are for the individual that you're speaking to, and then homing in on what are the relevant kind of aspects of the business that will relate to that candidate's needs, and then really focusing on those things when you're talking about the organisation. But really doing that consistently throughout the interview process to enable them to have a really good understanding and a full understanding of what the offering is and the environment they'll be going into. And also, if you can offer a range of people that they speak to who are also then, reiterating those key things that the business is offering, really creates that understanding for a candidate to understand what they're going to be potentially walking into.
Makes a lot of sense. How important is punctuality?
I think in an interview situation, really important. It shows that you have the ability to prepare. It shows that you are taking the opportunity seriously. Of course, we all run late from time to time. If you are running late for an interview, I think just making sure that you've let the interviewer know at the earliest possible time you can, and they're giving it a full explanation. So I think a case by case scenario when these things do happen, but I think it does give a good indication of, have you given yourself enough time? Have you, prepared well enough for the interview and taken into consideration any delays that might occur? So I think it does definitely give a good impression. Yeah.
Are you less kind towards people who are late for a virtual interview than you are for a physical one?
I think it's looking at it from a case by case perspective. I think there's always a reason for someone being late, so understanding the why. I think it does show that there might be a lack of preparation. It shows that they might not be as organised. So it does perhaps highlight some challenges or some skill gaps. But essentially, understanding the why is really imperative, and how often it's happening. If you've got 3 or 4 different stages in the interview process, and someone's only late for one, and they've given a really open and honest reason as to why, I think that's totally fair enough. Everyone's opinion will differ on this, but I think a reoccurring pattern of behaviour is probably more of an indication of a skill set gap, which is something that we would typically look for. So I don't think I would be unkind or biased to somebody that is late. I think if they are repetitively late in that interview process, then that will show that there is perhaps a skill set gap that we would then address with the candidate. But yeah, really understanding the why is absolutely key, and then looking at that repeat behaviour would be key when it comes to
Sure.
punctuality, I think.
So again, it's all about perception, I guess, isn't it? Really, and
Yeah.
giving the impression. So I guess a final question back to you. Are you aware of your body language when you're interviewing? What impression do you want to give off when you're interviewing someone? And a final kind of follow on to that is, what practical things do you do? Are you aware of to make sure you give the impression you want to?
Yes, the answer to your question is yes. I am very aware of my body language in an interview because I want to make sure that the interviewee has the best possible impression of Montage and myself. So I will be, um, you know, I will make a conscious effort to sit up in an interview and to look. I have positive body language, so I won't fold my arms. I will make lots of eye contact. I'll be very friendly, and I would like, and yeah. So I think those are the key things that I would potentially do in an interview to make sure that I am. Hopefully giving off the best possible impression, and of course turning up on time, making sure that candidates, if they obviously have turned up on time, are not waiting too long, and then just being really clear in the process and having really open communication with them, I think is really imperative. But yeah, I think experience is everything now in a candidate short market. Candidates coming away from an interview feeling good, feeling like they've had a really good experience, that they've had an open and honest conversation, I think will set companies aside to those that go into an interview coming out feeling a little bit perhaps not as well informed, and not feeling as though they've had a good experience.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the days of employers being able to pick and choose from a big list of candidates is shrinking rapidly. I think that the whole interview process from the first interview all the way through to the final interview is all very much part of attracting them to your brand, to your company, to your business, and to your culture. So I think there's a good place to end. So Usha, thank you very much for your time this morning
Thank you.
in a rainy and grey London. Thank you to our listeners, and we will see you again next week.